Well, that's exciting.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
Welcome to Kudomusicology, a Ludomusicology Literature review. I'm Musicologess. With me is Hoagie Time.
Hoagie time.
Dr. Julianne Grasso. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is the coolest stream ever. I tell you this every day, even though we have another stream, but it's okay.
We do have another stream.
This is still the coolest one.
Well, that's a nice thing to say. We're getting off the ground. We're getting our bearings here.
Yeah.
I'm learning how to actually stream sometimes.
I mean, look at this beautiful title slide we got.
No. So Julianne gets special treatment in that this paper today mentions Link to the Past, and so I just went a little ham on the animated sprites from the game. So yeah, depending on the, if you have a paper that's focused on a single game, I try to like theme the slides around that. Sometimes we've had things that aren't really about any particular game, and then I just kind of go with aesthetics. I feel like I need like sparkles around me when I say that. Aesthetic.
Yeah.
So, Julianne, as many of you may know, is a member of the stream team with us. And yeah, we brought you in like pretty early because Ryan asked me almost right. I think, yeah, I was on the first stream with him for Final Fantasy VI. And then was it like the second or third week Doug couldn't make it?
Yeah, it was before the end. And then I was a substitute that like never left.
Yeah, we kept you. We kept you forever.
I just kept showing up. I showed up the next week and you're like, okay. Can't kick her off now.
Did she even go here?
Yeah, that's what happened. And over 5 years later, I still haven't left. So
yeah, it's
been a lovely time.
So I guess you go here now, but you also still have a lot of feelings about games.
I have a lot of feelings, which is a lot of this article is like, yes. I have a lot of feelings and other people do too. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so I think we met at the very first NACFAGUM in Youngstown. And then I don't know if it was through, like, did we just get close through streaming or did it just kind of happen gradually at NACFAGUMs?
Yeah, like we were, because I remember, and I was telling you this before, but I was so intimidated by you at that first NACFAGUM, North American Conference on Video Game Music, for other folks who maybe, I think almost everyone in this chat probably knows that when we say NACFAGUM, but it so rolls off the tongue.
It's so mellifluous.
But I was so intimidated by you, and you had this paper on Bach and Bach quotations and references in video games, right? Which turned into an article that won the award for like Bach scholarship. So I was pretty shook. Reason to be intimidated. And I was like, I want to talk to her. Maybe she knows this game, Final Fantasy IV, because I feel like there's a Bach quotation in there. And like I was like getting up the nerves to talk to you and be like, do you know this game? So anyway,
a little bit gold
from there, we like, saw each other at like every NACFAGUM and various things, and then we streamed forever. So it's been a good time.
Well, and it just goes to show you like your perception of how everybody else is in the field is so funny, because that was my very first conference presentation.
Which I would have never have guessed.
The only one I had attended before that was that previous AMS. And the only reason I was at NACFAGUM, and I may have told the story on stream already, but I met Neil Lerner. It was actually in New Orleans, which like this year will be the anniversary of me meeting Neil Lerner, because he gave a paper on arcade stuff, and I went up to him and I was like, I do music and disability and you're my hero, fangirling, and he was so gracious and wonderful. And then he was like, wait, you do video game music, how did you see anything about this conference? And I was like, no, like I'm not on the right listservs, I guess. And so he's like, well, do you have send me an abstract? So I actually had like totally missed the deadline, but he was like, send me just anything. And I think I don't know if they needed more papers or something, but he recruited me. funny.
They didn't need more papers because I was rejected from that conference. I still went.
Well, Neil
Neil
believed in me, I guess. So yeah, they stuck me. I was the very first paper of day one. It was like 8 a.m. I was scared out of my wits.
You were the first paper. Yeah, I remember that. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I was real scared. So it's just so funny that like anybody else would like perceive me as being like put together and like smart.
I was like, she's so smart and cool. And like, I was like, obviously I would get rejected. I could never be that good. Like it was exactly that. Like, I'm not even lying.
I remember seeing you present on things and thinking that you were the smartest person. And even like you would be at an ACFGM and then you would be like, I have like a really half-baked question. And then what would come out of your mouth would be like beautiful.
I really appreciate it. And I realize that probably sounds like so obnoxious to be like, I have a stupid question and then it's smart. But like, I really thought what was coming out of my mouth was stupid, and I would tell myself like, I asked too many questions today, they were all stupid. Like I would go back at night like in the so like all these like academic perceptions are just wild. We like grow up in imposter syndrome. Yes. And like that shapes the way that we see the world. Mm-hmm. And we're all like can't see the world correctly, which is not great if we're doing any sort of scholarship about that. But anyway, it's just very funny to reflect on.
Anyway, I wanted to get into sort of like our histories and how we know each other because yes, we are celebrating giving kudos to each other's scholarship on this stream. It's a cozy reading group with friends where we've got our like coffee or tea or whatever, and just like hanging out, having a chat about everything. Yeah. But as we all know, I'm really interested in the process and not only of the publication, but like I think some of this stuff is really, really interesting for people. And if we have students that are ever signing in, like, I think it's good to know sort of how we came up in the field and the way that we found a home because we built these relationships. Like if you had been intimidated enough to not come say hi, it may have taken us a lot longer to develop what I now think of as like a super close friendship.
I know. So I went to your
wedding. The stream team, we're in like constant communication. We're like we have a Facebook message. It's like one of the only reasons I opened Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, that's like the only reason I have it. It's like this group thread we got.
Yeah, we've got a nice cozy group thread and we're just like always hanging out. Julianne came to my wedding and we played Mario. Because we had retro video game stations set up at my wedding and would have come to the bachelorette, but ended up there was some kind of conflict or something. Because you and Karen both got invited, but then you both couldn't swing it.
I don't remember why.
But Jessica Getman came to my bachelorette, which was so fun because she was like swinging through on her way to Michigan. So it was like awesome. But yeah, it's like all of these like genuine friendships. And like in some ways they're such deeper relationships than even like just the local friends because we have all of this like scholarship stuff in common, all this training and not to mention the areas we're working in. And even when you get into a department, as you just have, you're often the one that does the thing that you do. It's not like you're in a whole department of Ludomusicologists. If you're lucky, you might get one or two.
That'd be cool. One day when we take over.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we go to these conferences and we build these virtual chances to hang out because it's the best part of being in the field. Like I find the work we do very fulfilling. Just personally, I always joke that like my work may not like have any actual utility for anyone. Like I kind of don't care how much it gets cited. Like I'm not on that kind of tenure clock because I'm an LTAC. So it's like I end up just being like, people are giving me opportunities to like get into this thing that I really love. Like I feel like it's an indulgence for me. So that's all great. But I think the relationships are like what keeps the humanities human, etc.
There you go. Adorable. I mean, I tell this to grad students too all the time, is that because I think that every grad student goes through an existential crisis and like that's just part of it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't need to be so lonely. And in fact, it's not just networking for future job purposes or future publication purposes, because like truly though, I mean, we've been in edited volumes together because we know each other. So that's part of it, but like really getting through academia and building collaborations and building community and just being people that you could vent to, I think is what everyone needs to try to cultivate as much as you can.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
Speaking of the work, let's dive in, shall we? This week, we are looking. So I, of course, like anyone, I wanted to do that Final Fantasy IV chapter in the RPG book, but as I looked at my little schedule of my collabs with the AMS Ludomusicology study group, they already had you scheduled, but it was like later. Later than so I was like, okay, we're gonna do this other one just so I can have Julianne on earlier.
Just a lot of me
and hang out. And also I really enjoy, I'm sure as many of us do, all 4 pieces in the colloquy on Canons, because they all take such different tacks with the whole approach, and yet they all kind of speak to each other in interesting ways too. I like that I heard when Jin was on that the 4 of them were circulated between you at some point, so you were able to kind of see what everybody else was saying, and so most of you have a reference to like, oh, as you know, Karen Cook says, or as Will says in his, because there are some interesting overlaps here. So you know, we think of Canons. As a wedding violinist, I think of in D specifically, but in general, we are talking about Canons. In this case, we're going to focus on like fan creation and sort of the creation of headcanon and alternative canons, which is awesome because it can kind of not only expand our fandoms and you know, really make these worlds even more vibrant to hang out in, but it also can be kind of edgy, kind of resistant to sort of dominant narratives, which is very exciting. All right.
Canons
as music and Muse. So this was from the first JSMIG, Journal of Sound and Music and Games.
And I think this was the second of the 4. Like they were organized in a certain order.
So was it Will and then you and then?
I think it was Will, me, Jin, and then Karen, I believe.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, I think Karen's was the last one because I think that she has a kind of summary a little bit. So like if you were to read like a journal front to back, which I think almost none of us do, but nonetheless, that was kind of the idea. But of course you can, it's modular. You can pick, choose your own adventure. So
it's like a video game or something.
What?
So, we've heard a little bit about, this was something that the editors asked you all, right? They approached you on this?
I think for me, I was a secondary person to be approached because I was still a grad student at the time. And I think that like, I don't quote me on this, although I'm about to say, I think Will was probably maybe the first person that was approached, or maybe Karen was, I'm not sure. She might be in the chat, I'm not sure. But then they were like, well, if we do a roundtable, we want to get, you know, maybe some publication opportunities for grad students. So this was sort of what I think the motivation kind of was. Because also Jin was a grad student at the time as well. And then Will and I had also worked on a joint lightning talk, like theory versus musicology dueling papers kind of thing at AMS SMT 2018, where we had a candidate. Sorry, I can't. If I look at the
congratulations. I don't know if we've been able to say so on stream, but that I was so excited when I saw there was like. I feel like there was an Instagram story of like about to go into the defense, and I was just like, but at that point, at that point you'd already passed by the time I saw it. But I was like, so sending all the good vibes. So
yeah. Anyway. Exciting times. So Will Gibbons and I had done the 2 lightning talks at the joint conference at AMS SMT in 2018, and American Musicological Society and Society for Music Theory. I don't ever know if like non-music people ever kind of show up to this, but you never know. They're lurking in the chat. So this was also the joint meeting of the AMS study group Music and Media, I believe, and the Film and Multimedia interest group of SMT, perhaps. Maybe not. I don't remember anymore. Anyway, we did a joint thing, and so the idea of that was that we were both approaching this idea of concerts, of video game music concerts, from like a musicological angle and a theoretical angle. And so this is when I brought in this first look at this Zelda concert stuff and looking at the construction of narrative through music and musical medley. And so that's kind of a centerpiece, I think, of this article. And so I think just to kind of wrap that all in, that was also why I think Will was sort of like, why don't you just bring that into this article, this like colloquy thing, because it's relevant, sort of. And I was like, I don't know how it's relevant, but okay. And then I realized it is quite relevant.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have like your thing that you've already done, and then you're like, how do I build a narrative that makes sense in this kind of other theme? But I think it works out. I don't think it seems forced, but maybe it does.
It pairs a little bit with Will's too, because Will's one in this volume is all about like these sort of official concert tours, and he's got, of course, a section in the book. I'm sure that was pre-book work at this point, but section in the book trying to kind of get into this idea of we are sort of concertizing, classifying game music, and bringing it into these spaces. And you do touch on that, but you also get into more fan side of stuff that isn't in these sort of like formalized spaces. So let's go forward. Yeah, SMT, Shin Megami Tensei. I only like recently came across that confusion.
I know, because SMTV, which is also the SMT video like cast, is always trending, and I'm like, ooh, and I'm like, it's not SMT.
It's different SMT.
I know. Anyway,
so we have this concept of canons, the canon. I put sacred in scare quotes.
Yes.
But there are a lot of people that sort of treat it that way, that it's this sort of standard bearer of greatness. And then you open with a really adorable story about making up stories about the characters in video games when you were little. And therefore you're using the games as a canon of source material for making up these stories. I'm sure a lot of us had that. I think I posted on Twitter at one point, I found an old like Harvest Moon, like almost like I was making myself a guidebook.
Where
that
was a thing too.
It was like part diary, and I was like drawing pictures of the different crops and like the farm and everything. This was the Super Nintendo Harvest Moon. For there've been a lot, and a lot of them have been up until Stardew. There was a lot of like meh Harvest Moon games. It had kind of gone off the rails a little bit. And now I feel like they're trying to kind of like get back in because Stardew reopened a door. Yeah. Anyway, we had these games that we were super connected to as children, and I used to do this with movies or books too. Just kind of like imagining scenes that weren't in there,
like expanding the world that was created by that universe, the world, whatever. Yeah,
and it's so natural to do that and sort of feel kind of like you're still in it. So I open with one of your quotes here, which I love, and it also has authentic and scare quotes, which I also love.
We got to do that.
I feel like we can't ever use that word without quotes.
Of course.
You write this more textual notion of canonicity differs from our typical definition of a great works historical canon, but the two conceptions share a commitment to some idea of value or a standard to abide. In this sense, the word canon can refer to the, quote, authentic materials, the characters' world stories that these fictional worlds present, and this usage has become commonplace in the digital age now that fans can both engage with and share creations more easily. So, not a thesis yet, but just good Good words.
Words, yes.
So fans have their own canons. Surprise, surprise. And the things that fans are going to decide are like the best of all time are not necessarily the ones that the scholars will decide have the most artistic value or whatever. Sometimes the stuff that's like really artsy and innovative isn't really very popular. There's a lot of different canons, and then there's going to be individuals that have their own kind of like personal like pedagogical canons and things like that.
Yeah.
So fan creations are in relationship with these, again, quote, authentic. Because it's kind of nebulous sometimes too.
Yeah.
Fan creations are in relationship with these authentic canons, especially in a big sprawling franchise. It's like some stuff is kind of more canonic in a franchise than others, and
it's like, what even is canon? Like, does this offshoot count? Are these like novelizations of Star Trek also canon? And like, what? It gets so complex. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, not only the creation of personal headcanon based on your own interpretations. I like if I say something like, I don't acknowledge, the first 3 Star Wars films. And by first 3, I mean 1, 2, and 3, of course, not 4, 5, and 6. That's headcanon, right? Is like I'm just deciding like I don't want, or maybe I don't want the last 3 to be in like my headcanon because I don't like where they took the series, or if you do that type of selective paying attention to only pieces of a thing. Shipping characters together that are not explicitly in a relationship.
Yeah.
So that's big in like
headcanon is these 2 characters are actually lovers or whatever.
Right.
Very common.
Right. That's really common. So of course that can just kind of exist for you, and you can just say, you know what, like this is my thing. It's like when I watch Pretty in Pink, and I almost want to stop before the end because I want her to just be with Ducky. I want Molly Ringwald to end up with Ducky because he's like adorable and a really good friend, and he's got a killer sense of style. And like I know it's supposed to be this like the rich boy hangs out with the girl from the other side of the track, so you're supposed to want the main couple to get. But I think he's kind of a jerk to her through the whole movie. So then I'm like, okay, I would have been okay with her just. And actually, in the book, she does, I think, end up with Ducky.
There's a book.
Yeah, there was like original source material. I guess the reason this is such a digression. I guess the reason they changed it was because John Cryer and Molly Ringwald didn't have like the best chemistry together, and so they just had her like end up. Y'all can correct me, but I remember seeing this at one point that it had to do with just like it didn't work on screen, and so they ended up changing the ending because I think the whole idea is it just doesn't quite work, but then Ducky's there to at least take her to prom, even if they don't like end up together. They get to have their like nice moment. So yeah. So in my head it's like, I kind of prefer that version.
Yeah.
Based purely on who I would have wanted to date in high school. So we can have headcanon, we can ship our characters, we can go far outside anything that's actually presented in whatever piece of fandom we're looking at. But fans are also going to pressure creators of ongoing fictions. They're going to try to get their ideas in front of them and get them to make certain choices. And creators do sometimes give into that. And yet that gets derided as fan service.
Yeah, that's often a negative term. Like, it's not always a negative term, fan service, but it's often, I think, negatively tinged.
Well, and so often, like, when you encounter it in anime, it's often, like, really pervy, like... like
nothing worse than fans.
Like the really short skirt where like it flips up a little bit, on the sexy girl character.
Like a sexy girl thing. Like fan service being almost like a synonym for like a sexy girl thing.
Mm-hmm. But it can be any of this sort of like, you're kind of giving in to, what the fans wanted to happen instead of maybe following the narrative as it should have gone. or there's issues maybe when the creators don't listen enough either. Like they have to walk a line if something gets really popular. I'm thinking of Game of Thrones and that final season and how disappointed everyone was, and like
didn't happen.
Partially they were working without a script in a way because they didn't have books for that point and they had to kind of finish off the story. But I think what made everyone so angry was that the characters didn't feel like themselves anymore. Like they were acting in ways that just didn't feel like the characters that we fell in love with. Tyrion was like not being smart in a bunch of episodes. You're just like, your whole thing is that you drink and you know things, right?
Not the dialogue. Like, there's no excuses for D&D, but the dialogue, the
dialogue didn't feel right. Like the plot structure didn't feel right. So, it's always great point, Ryan. It's which fans are being serviced. Awkward way to phrase it, but it is awkward. Right. So, are we giving into kind of like a mainstream, sometimes folks do kind of arrive at like a really good idea and that gets picked up on and utilized. And, it's a question of, did they see this from the fans or was it just the way to go? And they also saw it that way versus, feeling like we've changed a character without doing the proper like setup to kind of get them to that point, and then it just feels like this isn't the same character anymore. I don't get it. Anyway, fan canons. So fans engage with canons lots of different ways. They are in relationship. Wait, is that the same? That is the same slide. Whoa. Wonder what I was supposed to put there. Wonder what that was going to be. Anyway, musical engagement with canons is kind of the next step here for our purposes, in that it's worth considering how fan music might serve a similar outlet to fan fiction, at least to explore how fans negotiate a personal musical subjectivity in relation to a sense of the authentic and narrative media like video games. So we often think of, like, when we're talking about fan production, fan headcanon, it's often fan fiction. It's often writing stories and posting them. Sometimes art, where you might draw the two characters together or something. Or just like you want to decorate your house with stuff that reminds you of your favorite thing, so you make it. So there's that sort of element too of like bringing your object of fandom into the real world. We talked about that a little bit with George last week. This desire to like crossover into your space in fun ways. And so music is of course a way that we do that. We can engage with any piece of the canonic object in order to kind of remix it and change it around.
Yep.
So you have your kind of further questions leading up to your thesis. So some questions. How does music tell the stories of the games themselves? Honestly, that's like a whole can of worms, right? That gets into what can music represent in lieu of a text.
I'm glad this is a short essay and it's just a question, not an answer to that question.
that like gets to the heart of absolute music, right?
Maybe Stefan's doing that.
Can music tell the stories? Of course, we know that they're accompanying the games, so we do have that association that we draw. So how is music telling those stories? How might we understand arrangements, performances, remixes, covers, etc. in relation to their source material? If video games are inherently interactive, music is a part of that interaction, even if it is in the background. Musical fan creations are typically quite different from officially sanctioned concerts of video game music, but both are nonetheless interpretations of canonical source material, and these interpretations tell the stories of play. So that's kind of like your thesis, I think.
Yeah, I think it is.
Like, fan canons are good too. Like, they're not like a lesser form of creation.
Yeah, and it sort of tells you about something. Like, it tells you about the way that folks are interacting with games or understanding games or filtering games through a particular lens of some experience, whether that's literally this is like playing the game or an experience of being themselves or wanting something else from the game or from that world.
Yeah.
So, and the music can tell that as well. And I think that that's something to look at.
Yeah, and it's from a music standpoint, it's always interesting, like to go on OC Remix, as we've done with Ryan
We've done many
sometimes.
times. Yeah.
Yeah, and see like which tracks from the game have like a zillion things done, and
Yeah.
which ones aren't people like remixing as much.
And all, like, maybe stuff lends itself better to more remixes, or maybe stuff's just more popular as a game. Like, where is that intersection happening? It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, or it was at like a really powerful narrative moment, so like
Yeah.
people want to engage with that moment because of their like processing, you know, their emotions
Yeah.
and their
Yeah.
memories,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of interesting things it can tell us. Boop. There we go. Which brings us to the Legend of Zelda 25th Anniversary album, which was orchestral arrangements of music from the franchise. So this predates the Symphony of the Goddesses, which I think more people are familiar with. That concert tour started after this came out.
I believe so.
But it seems almost. I don't think it's the same people, but it feels like a precursor. Like
it's
this idea is definitely it's some of the same people. Okay,
it's some of the same people. Yeah.
So they got tapped to then turn some of this stuff into a concert series, because even the sound we're going to listen to a little bit. The album itself was for the 25th anniversary, and it was bundled with Skyward Sword in 2011. So did you have a copy of this because you had Skyward Sword?
I got the gold, not the gold cartridge because it wasn't a cartridge, but there was a lot of sort of like the material bundled object situation going on with the gold CD of this album and the gold controller, the Pro controller.
Cool.
With the little Triforce on it. So a lot of iconography going on. It was like an actually like, I'm such a sucker for like a special edition bundle. Like I really am. Like it's just really stupid. But you kind of needed the Pro controller to play this game anyway. So I was like, heck.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm a music scholar. I wasn't yet. I was like working a real job in 2011 and wasn't sure I was going to grad school. But anyway, I got that, and it had like 8 medleys. And they're all medleys. There's not a single track that's just like one long arrangement of something. They're all different sorts of medleys.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, because like Emer Noon was also who's the conductor on the album, was also tapped to conduct a lot of the Symphony of the Goddesses. She still might be doing that. I'm not sure. So yeah, a lot of the same people. Chad Sider doing a lot of the arrangements.
And then in Chad Sider, yeah, and you talked to Chad Sider?
I did. I had a phone conversation with him back in like 2016 or 17 or something like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, because you kind of reference that conversation,
personal conversation in my
so what's interesting here, as with any type of kind of officially licensed product like this, is like, okay, when we have medleys, like, are some games represented more than others? You know, what's the spread? And here we have 5 tracks of medleys from 4 different games. So 2 tracks out of 8 are devoted to Link to the Past, which sort of tells you like there's something about this game's music that is being privileged here. And then 3 whole different variations of the main theme. I didn't listen to all of them. I should. Why 3 variations on the main? Like, are they vastly different from one another?
I don't even remember. I should have re-listened to these myself.
Yeah, I'll have to take a listen.
They're actually on my old computer.
We're gonna focus on some different moments, so it didn't really come up. But yeah, that was one of my thoughts. Was like, well, they've got to be 3 very different takes, right? Because if I remember correctly, I don't think they were very different takes. But interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to me.
So they included some other stuff.
Okay.
But the 25th anniversary, there was the 25th anniversary medley itself was the one that I focused on, which also includes some main theme variations in itself. So I do remember that, but I feel like the other ones, maybe it's Stefan remembers like all these different ones, but yeah.
Yeah, so our opening track on the album is just called 25th Anniversary Medley. Like, doesn't have any kind of cutesy title or anything.
Correct.
The opening track, you speak specifically to the positioning of the Dark World theme from Link to the Past. and how it has this really kind of long introduction where it's just like, wait for it, and it keeps building and like rumbling up, and then finally it launches into the big, brass moment, right?
Big melody. Yep. And it's the climax of this entire medley.
Yeah.
Is that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you'd think like that's not the most heroic, it's not the most kind of positive, inspiring part of it. This is the moment when everything is bad in the game, and you're trying to like rescue this world. But that theme is so good, and everyone just connected with it. And you note that like this is not translating the music to symphony orchestra. It's really, as you say, maximizing the affects surrounding the memory of play. The melodic materials simply act as a signifier for a link to the past. A link to the past, indeed.
I hate myself.
I quoted this just so I could have that moment.
Thank you.
Because that made me legitimately laugh out loud. And you had spoken to Gibbons in this section, so you say, and more to like Will's points about the concert versions of these. This ends up positioning this particular Super Nintendo game as sort of like the climax of the medley. So it puts in our head the idea that the Super Nintendo was a golden age.
Yes, and there's actually I went to one of the Symphony of the Goddesses, the first quest or something, when it was first happening in like 2016, I forget. And they had this on there. They don't always have this on there. I think they don't anymore, this particular arrangement. And it's me like listening to this, but also being in concert and seeing how people reacted to different parts of the medley was one of my motivations for thinking about this, whether it was for this essay or for the SMT-AMS thing that I did too. But I think that I kind of wish that I had a bit more of a moment, or I think I talked about it in the conference paper about my own sort of relationship to that particular track, because everyone around me where I was sitting was like younger than me, and was really their moments of reaction were Wind Waker at the earliest. Even Ocarina of Time, like when there was stuff from there and during this concert, only some like it was very much like a kid's Wind Waker kind of moment, and that was their like point of like, I remember playing that game, and like this is like I'm screaming for that. And then so for a while in the concert, I don't remember. I have like the program, like what the tracks were, the program, the tracks, the movements. There for a while in the concert, there was nothing older than Ocarina of Time, and then finally, it was like the climax for me of the concert was that moment, and finally we get this Link to the Past moment. And then it happens, and like I think I stood up, and I was like the only like person, because everyone else was a kid and their parents, and I'm like, I know that game. That's my game. That was my first Zelda game that I played for real. I mean, I tried to play the first Zelda and was just terrible because I was like 0 years old. And I was like, this is my whole thing. And I think there was something about being like a feeling of ownership, a feeling of fandom, and a feeling of like, this is something for me, like this speaking to me specifically. And I wanted to talk about that kind of feeling, like not just me feeling that, but other people feeling that with like Wind Waker, and other people feeling like this kind of ownership and community, like a personal and this public, of being like, yes, this is us. This was my game. This is my game. This my experiences, like go off, that kind of thing. So that was like kind of my motivation for looking at this moment, which I thought was so fun.
Referencing first Zelda games, did I ever tell the story about one of the first times I taught video game music? And I had a very bro-y undergrad come up to me after class. Or no, the lecture had nothing to do with video. I wasn't teaching video game music, but I think it had come up that was what I did. That, my dissertation was on video game music. And this sweet bro comes up to me, and I use the word bro very purposely. Just, you know,
Sweet bro.
picture the backwards baseball cap. Yeah, you know, slightly too tight of shirt to show off the gym work. And it basically was like, oh, you do video games. That's so cool. You know, and then basically proceeds to tell me like, oh, if you're trying to get into games, like a good place to start would be Legend of Zelda. And I said, I beat the first 3 before you were born. I built this city on rock and roll. No, I was like, seriously, really? You're going to come up and fake gamer girl me when I just told you my dissertation
I hate everybody.
is on game music? Like, bro, when were you born?
I
had already beaten 3 Zeldas when you were born.
To beat the deep magic. Yeah, for real. Like, come on.
And like, if you're gonna pull that, like, pick a more obscure title. My goodness, not one of the most like 2 most famous series in all of history. Like,
wow, I've never heard of that. Thanks.
Oh, really? Which Zelda is the best? Which one should I start with? Like, come on. Yeah, so I played the very first Zelda. I was pretty little when my brother brought home the Nintendo, but we had Mario. We had the like Track Meet Duck Hunt, you know, Triple E cartridge, and then Legend of Zelda were like the 2 games that came home the first day. So like that was what I played. And you know, then attempted Zelda 2 for the rest of my childhood. So I actually I beat Link to the Past before I ever beat Zelda 2, but you know, I tried. So, and Zelda 2 actually has some of my favorite music, and it always gets overlooked in these, like almost always. When like
Except
a Zelda
Super
2
Smash
moment,
Brothers.
When that happened, I was so excited because like it's not
it was
super
like a
common.
Moment. Yeah.
And I've also mentioned when Breath of the Wild came out, Steve Reale and I were like talking about it or texting about it, like the moment when you get to Death Mountain and it just has the bum 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 in the like low in the piano. It's like real subtle. It's just like a quick little moment, and like screaming and dropping the controller because I was like, they never use that anywhere. It was so cool for that to pop up. Yeah. So anyway, Zelda, it cuts deep into our hearts. So anyway, let's listen to this like very slow build just to get a sense of how long they drag out, where you're like, oh, I think that's going to be it. And then it finally busts out.
Yeah.
It starts quiet. Still hasn't really started. And then of course we get the amazing brass moment. This is it right here.
So loud.
Oh, so good. That's such a good moment, right? And yeah, the use of the rest there. It's like in Short Skirt Long Jacket by Cake, how they have the rest. And like for a moment, you're kind of like caught on the edge of it, and then it launches back into the groove.
It's like a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
I don't think the audio was shared with me, but I know that so well that I was tracking in my head. And I'm like, Papa.
Let me, I've had that problem with PowerPoint and Discord. So let me just do the share this way.
So for the future tracks, but I used to pick up glass bottles to this music. Oh yeah. Like it was so, like, I thought it was cool too, that it was such a, there it is. I hear it.
Good.
That, it's a track that you hear for so long that you just tune it out and you're just like, whatever. It loops and loops and loops. And there's nothing special about that moment Like, but when it gets kind of played this way and it plays you in that way with that expectation. And I talked to Chad Snyder about this. I was like, so why that track? Like, why, what were you thinking? Like, what were you thinking? No,
Accusatory.
He was like, I just thought it was funny. Like I thought it was funny to add that rest and like build up this expectation and then to have a big rest where you think it's going to happen and then to drop it. And I just wanted to troll everybody. So he had this, like, he said the word troll.
And yet it's so much more effective than just trolling.
I was like, okay.
That's fun.
Like, it like basically made me cry, but like in a good way.
Yeah.
But that was like, it was kind of like a tongue-in-cheek moment for him. And I think it like part of it is like putting that, I think it like, no matter what, it's like affectively powerful, whether it's meant to be this tongue-in-cheek moment or this moment that is like of expectation and of deferred expectation, which can either be like a form of a joke or like a form of like powerful memory stuff. That, quote me on that word, powerful memory stuff. That's a theoretical thing now.
It's very David Huron, Sweet Expectations of you.
Yeah.
I feel like you're floating on the edge of the cognition stuff here.
I should have just went to OSU. Anyway.
And here, I just went there for the musicology and then kind of ended up taking classes with him because they sounded interesting. And then like, I was like, oh, he's a really big deal.
Yep.
And a really delightful person. He was just like always so kind and generous with his time and, explaining to the musicologist all the sciencey stuff. Because there were times where I didn't quite follow everything in those courses, but, because I wasn't in the lab. I wasn't like doing the empirical research. I was doing more the like what we glean from all the studies types of cognition courses.
Right. Yeah, that's the same kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, this leads right into the Symphony of the Goddesses concert tour, which ran from just after this came out, because that was 2011. So this was 2012 to 2018. So kind of in the
at least the first series, and then they did a second series,
mm-hmm.
and then the pandemic happened, and I actually haven't caught up with anything, so I don't know. But Stefan, keep being like, Stefan knows.
Yeah, Stefan knows. It's all in the dissertation. We're all just like chomping at the bit for Stefan's dissertation. We talk about it all the time. We're always referencing it. So we're like pre-citing you.
We're hype beasts over here, but no pressure.
We just like hyping all our friends. We're excited about Jen's dissertation. We're excited about Stefan's dissertation. This another side note, this is one of the few fields I know where like we actively read each other's dissertations.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes I don't read like cover to cover everybody's, but like that type of, a lot of people, it's like almost like a shameful secret. You're like, okay, the best dissertation's a done dissertation. It's done. It's out there. And then instantly you're trying to like turn stuff into books or articles. And not that we don't do that, but like, I don't know. There's a little bit more of like, we actually are looking at each other's dissertation. Like I've read more of yours than yours, Ryan's.
Yeah, I've read yours.
George.
I've assigned chapters of yours to students. Like I think that we do this. Like we assign chapters of dissertations. It's also useful to do that anyway, so students can see what a dissertation looks like.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder if that'll change. I think as soon as somebody puts out like a book or kind of a more definitive version of a thing, like you can refer to that instead. So like my example is my cognition physiology chapter where I talk about how game sound affects you as the player in your body and your mind and everything. I turned that into a Cambridge chapter for Tim and Melanie. So like, and it's a lot shorter. It cut it about in half, but it's more assignable that way. And obviously there was an editorial process with that.
In my review, like I reviewed that volume for JSMG, and I think I say like, this is so assignable about your chapter, like in a good way. Like it just distills so much for people that otherwise you need to read so much of other things to kind of get. So I think it's so useful.
Yeah, and maybe it's just also, I don't know, accessibility of some of the material. Yeah, I really need to get the little Streamlabs bot that that pops up every now and then and says what we're doing. I need to remember how to configure that, because Ryan started using that on the stream where it will say what we're playing. And I'm like, that's so useful, because I think you can just like basically click a button and have it pop up again. So, yeah, if anybody needs a copy of this, then, that's pretty easy to do. I thought the first issue was free, though. I thought that one was open access.
They changed it.
Oh, did they change it? Okay.
I will put an email of mine, one of my burner emails, but I still check it for a PDF.
Perfect. Love it. Yeah. So anyway, Symphony of the Goddesses, the website promised fans could relive moments. And you're like, interesting choice of a word here.
I love
right?
that word, yeah.
The music will allow the listener more than just recall and access to an embodied memory that perhaps enacts something about experiences of play. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then there's the question here about okay, so we're kind of doing this formalizing canonization of this music. So is this saying that this is the tracks as they ought to have sounded if we didn't, have the NES limitations? I don't think you do not answer that as a yes here. You don't really posit
Correct.
one way or the other, but you do point out that's sort of a discourse that it floats on the edge of this, that there's almost this self-conscious attempt to legitimize it to a classical audience, because these concerts are being positioned to align with that classical canon.
Yep.
And sort of remove certain elements of the gameplay, but yet also tap into that for the people going. But yeah, the question of whether it's as they ought to have sounded.
Yes. And so also I was in my conversation with Chad Sider, who was, again, the arranger for many of the original Symphony of the Goddesses tracks and this particular medley that we're talking about. He was like, look, we have to appeal to the folks there who are maybe a gamer's parents because they're too young, who are bringing them there, who don't really know the games, maybe overheard some of the themes, but don't know the games. So we have usually these concerts have gameplay or scenes or something kind of projected during the concert. But even still, he was like, I want the music to really tell the story of the games for people who didn't play the games as well. And so that interested me too. And I tried to get him to kind of expand on that, but there's nothing incredibly theoretically specific that I could necessarily draw out, but just a sense of common themes that come in that are not necessarily just narrative themes, but also gameplay themes, and kind of mixing them in a musically interesting way such that people can get a sense of a musical story that aligns with a video game story during these kinds of concerts. But also, with the Symphony of the Goddesses, they had it's called Symphony #1, and they also had a symphony, a 4-movement or 3-movement, I forget, thing, and they organized them by movement. So formally, this arrangement was trying to appear as a classical symphony, sort of. And each of them were medleys, but it was sort of the Link to the Past movement and this movement, the Ocarina of Time movement, that kind of thing. 5 movements now. Yes, it's becoming a more later romantic
symphony fantastique of the goddesses.
It itself is going through a musical historical projection. And so they're doing all of that. And they're kind of appealing to this idea of the classical and appealing to this idea of being in the concert hall. And what do you do when you're in the concert hall? You have movements and don't clap between the movements, but people do, and they clap during the music. And no one cares because it's half rock concert, half classical concert, this whole thing. It's really, really interesting how they do that, because I don't think that they do so much of that classical appeal with other kinds of pop concerts, pops concerts and things like that, as much. Maybe with film stuff they do, but a regular sort of pops Christmas concert, I'm not sure that happens. Like in terms of like, here's a symphony in 5 movements, and we're going to play it for you like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But I haven't been to that many concerts because it's been a long pandemic.
Yes. I want to bring up, so Ryan says, I want to push back against Dana's point, hating on the ought to have been here now that we've seen high quality visual and aural remakes of SMB 64 and Zelda 64 thanks to leaked source ports that I can't link here. The games are legitimately more playable. Okay, but that's all well and good. Like, yes, we port them and we sort of do things with them that wouldn't have been possible on the original, but again, the key word here is ought to have sounded. That's implying that they sort of were, even as they're encoding on an NES, that they're not like looking at the NES in front of them and all of its capabilities, that they're just sitting here being like, gee whiz, this sucks, I wish I had a symphony orchestra. Like, I think there's space to say that, like, it's a really cool realization of the music, that was in a smaller number of channels. But like, you have to remember that at the time that this stuff was originally being written, that was cutting edge technology. So it's like, I don't like this kind of anachronistic, this view, or like when folks do the kind of uncompressed sampling and they're like, oh, this is Donkey Kong Country as it should have sounded. It's like, well, no, it was being written, on the materials, on the console with the, hardware and software that they had at the time. So that's all I mean by that. This is not me making a value judgment saying like, I hate the orchestrations. It's just this idea that it somehow, supplants the original or was, what Kondo intended from the beginning. I think that that's just a kind of a dangerous line of thinking.
Yeah.
Of course I say that. I'm really into early audio, right? But it's just this notion of like, we have to kind of remember that most folks are composing with whatever the latest stuff is. And really looking to exploit that and looking at all of the possibilities and the affordances inherent in that, instead of just always like having it be sort of like a negative thing. Limitation isn't necessarily a negative. And of course, nowadays there are people that consciously still choose the aesthetic, and choose to work within some of those original limitations. And like, it's become an aesthetic unto itself, of course, as we've seen. But yeah, my thing is not like, oh, we should never have these orchestral arrangements. But it's that whole discourse, like implying that like, oh, now that this exists, like screw the original, like which sometimes fans get really into that. Like, that's fine. Okay. Turn off the game sound and play this CD then, like while you play the game, I guess. But, I don't think we need to use like, I don't think we need that whole discourse. We don't need to talk about ought to have sounded. I think most of the time that's a really misguided way of getting into. Anyway, that's soapbox. Soapbox. But yeah, there's some really beautiful arrangements here, and actually, some of the more interesting arrangements are things outside of these official arrangements. Because they are making that appeal to the spaces that they were being performed in, so that sort of symphony hall positioning. So then we get to the fans. What kinds of musical stories these official arrangements don't tell? And here you cite Catherine Hemmons' Woke Gaming, Digital Challenges to Oppression and Social Injustice. Great book.
That was a chapter within that book. So she didn't write. She's the editors, Kashana Gray and David Leonard. I have the book here. Hello. Oh, wait.
Okay.
I just really like this cover. It's cool.
Thank you for correcting that. That was unclear from the...
That was unclear. Oops.
I didn't read closely enough. I guess
I could have cited it wrong and like it somehow got passed. So.
But the chapter in that looks at how fans reinterpret or critique series through their creations. And so here you note that this is a fan emphasis on Zelda's character is a good example of this, because we're giving the whole
More
series
agency,
is named after her,
yeah.
and yet she's not playable
Yeah.
in most of them. So we end up giving her more of like an interiority and more agency than in some of the games. So it's like almost making up for the fact that you don't play as her in many of the games and you're playing as Link instead.
Yeah, so this chapter is called The Legends of Zelda Fan Challenges to Dominant Video Game Narratives, and it talks about text, it talks about some like fan art and graphic novelizations from fans, and like where Zelda often, not, I think she's talking not just about Zelda, but a lot about Zelda. Is sort of brought to the fore as a main character who's reacting to and thinking about things that do happen in the series or don't happen in the series. But yeah, so that was sort of like, okay, well, what about music was my whole thing.
Right.
That's always my thing. Like every article is like, oh, music.
And there are a lot of great arrangements of Zelda's Lullaby, but the one you highlight here is To See Like Me, which is a big band arrangement by Jorik Bergman, or Bowler Hat.
Bowler Hat, yeah.
With new lyrics from possibly Zelda's perspective or possibly the arranger's perspective, because it's first person. So that's the kind of drawing on George's article from last week. The idea of creating this arrangement is like an enactment of Bowler Hat's identity. And there's sort of a putting yourself into it, even if you are writing lyrics that are maybe meant to be about Zelda's perspective. So let's just start at the beginning of this because it's killer. Much about the people involved in this?
Like, I do not. This wasn't originally uploaded. I don't think I cited OC Remix's upload back in the day. This was on Bandcamp.
Oh, neat.
And it hadn't been uploaded via OC Remix. So my original citation is like a dead link, I think. So I don't really know, but maybe some other folks like. Ryan's in the chat.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Has Megan done VGM timbre stuff yet? Yes. Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
Some Sega,
yeah, some Sega stuff. But I find all of her timbre work is useful. Like, all of it. So even if it's not specifically video games, there's just so much work on like synth technology and sort of classifying and ways to talk about timbre instead of just representing them with like, waveform spectrograph type stuff.
Yeah.
It really gets into the weeds with like, how do we talk about it? Really interesting food for thought. I think it's all brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to jump where there actually are lyrics. I actually didn't see when that was. There we go. Lucky.
Inside, let it guide. Can you hear my voice as it clears the void? Let it go.
Nice. So yeah, you can clearly hear the Zelda's Lullaby in there. Just such a slick arrangement. It's so cool. I was really glad you brought that to my attention because I'm not always the best at keeping up with. It's almost there's a lot of OC.
There's so many.
There's a lot. So
happy to
you have to be really like
get more, share more,
seeking out games that you're interested in and then kind of digging through all of the arrangements on a particular song. So unless somebody's specifically like, hey, this is a good one, you have to be in a mood to dig, I think, sometimes on there. And of course, often I just listen to the originals or I'm playing the originals because that's how I be. But I'm not, contrary to popular belief, I don't hate remixes. I hate when people have to like throw the baby out with the bathwater and I don't like the hating on the original just because other versions exist. Like, we can have multiple things. We can have all the things here. And that's what's neat about it, is hearing these different interpretations of the same types of tracks, like in such different realms. So here's another great example. Brilliant album. I listened to it last night as I was like sitting out on my porch working, and it was the best summertime chill album. So
it's a good one.
Zelda and Chill 2018. There's a Zelda and Chill 2 that came out, also good. I listened to both, by Mikkel, who made the beats, and DJ Cutman. Mm-hmm. And here, this is all the Zelda music is that kind of like lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to kind of vibe. It just remixes them. Everything's kind of a slower tempo. We've got a lot of smoother timbres in the synths, and just really interesting how some of the more like adventure epic tracks get kind of slowed down and turned into these more contemplative, relaxing sorts of things. So you're rightly asking, like, okay, we have something like this, so like what is this doing? It's not necessarily about just making fans remember experiences of play, but it's giving a listener a chance to engage with the music in a new way, and kind of redefine their contextual bounds, which I like.
Yeah, and like make a new space for themselves that still references these other spaces, like on your porch in the summer. Zelda and Chill.
Oh, yeah. And I see in the chat is there a difference between the words arrangements, remixes, adaptations, and covers? Yes.
There's definitely a difference between the words.
I don't know that I've ever articulated, like, because I haven't really worked on this sort of thing specifically, but yeah. I mean, arranging to me speaks to the process of taking whatever the original musical materials are, and then saying, okay, I'm going to put this on this instrument, and maybe adding in things that weren't in the original, like I'm going to write a new ostinato over this. So I think of the arrangement is the result of that at the end, but a lot of these are processes. So remixing, you can be juxtaposing different tracks. You can be, what else can you be doing in remixing? Like,
also
mashing up, redefining the relationships between the voices, bringing out things in different ways. So like, there's often a similar process happening. So like you can be doing an arrangement that is inherently a remix. Like, I think arrangement is kind of like maybe the biggest umbrella term over all of these.
More of a category.
Adaptation in music. That to me, that would be more of a straightforward, okay, I've done a transcript. I mean, again, this is not like officially anything, but an adaptation would be more like kind of what I've done, where like I have done a transcription of all of the channels on the NES, and then I just the lowest channel I put on the cello, and the top two I put in violins, and I make like a string trio or something, and we're basically just adapting it to play on our instruments. We might change the key to do that sometimes if it's in a really accessible key. I've done that like when I've taught game music to high schoolers. Sometimes stuff is in like 6 flats, and you're like, okay, we're gonna just pop this up a little bit. So that would be more of an adaptation to me. I think of these as all just like processes, but I'd love to hear Stefan's definitions of them. Please, like, throw them in the chat for us. I think that's really helpful. And then, a cover.
And covers. Oh my God. There's so many.
What is a cover? I don't know. I think of a cover as often it can be involved with remixing. It isn't, I mean, it's inherently involved with all these other processes, but I think a cover often specifically takes things and puts it into a different genre than it originally was, maybe. I'm really curious to hear Stefan's definition, having like actually had to think about this and not come up with it on the fly. But yeah, like I think they're kind of all similar things, but I think a lot of people use them sort of interchangeably.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, but like there's cover bands that try to sound exactly like like there's Journey cover bands, and their whole point is that they try to sound like Journey. So I guess it doesn't have to be in a different genre.
And not a half cover, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, please drop y'all's definitions in chat of these things, because
just crowdsource it.
I think on some level, a lot of us just go with whatever terms the people are using. I usually use arranging when I'm describing my own work. If that
just do a Twitter
anything.
poll. Yeah, I mean that's what I think of what you do as arrangement.
Yeah.
Arrangement for usually there's some sort of preposition.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm taking like a transcription and I'm doing something to it, moving it around, or that note goes too low, below the lowest note on my instrument, so I have to pop it up an octave or pop the whole thing up an octave, or doing something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think the arrangement has to be written down necessarily. I often do, but yes, thank you. Adaptation, umbrella term. Arrangement, more classically jazz-oriented. Remix, original pieces technologically manipulated. Transcription, keeping things pretty much the same formally, but for a different instrumentation. Cover, more in a pop style. Interesting. Yeah. So
yeah, I'll buy it. I'll buy it. I'll buy it and I'll cite it. And we're done.
I'm sure that's in the gist, and we're all awaiting that. Anyway, let's listen to some Zelda and chill. Let's chill for a moment, because we heard the epic orchestration leading up to the Dark World. What does Zelda and chill do with Dark World, you may ask? So we've got the kind of soft pad synth.
Slower.
Like bell timbre on the lead. I love that. I don't know what it is, but
a lot of super beautiful things.
It's so good. Oh jeez. This is not our Thursday night stream, chat.
Yes, I'm inviting my colleagues here.
Zelda and chill is not like Netflix and chill. Although it took me an embarrassingly long time to recognize that Netflix and chill was not just hanging out with someone and watching Netflix. Like by the time I realized it, because it works to just describe like, oh, we're gonna hang out and watch Netflix, or most of the time we're gonna sit and scroll Netflix and not be able to pick anything to watch.
It's a legit activity.
Yeah.
That is fun to do with friends.
Yeah. So and the idea of like we're chilling, but no, it took on this other terminology. I mean, I don't know. You are allowed to engage with the music however you like. But I think that this is about relaxing in general here. And even just like you can see from that, the video, the Breath of the Wild visuals, with that kind of like hazy, summery filter on them. And like the way that the sound wave and the little the Triforce in the middle, like everything is like aesthetic. There's that word again. I always feel like I have to whisper it.
Because I think it's like an almost ASMR moment. Because it's YouTube. I don't know.
Very aesthetic. Netflix and platonic relations. Yeah, I think that's how I would have liked to have used the term, but luckily I didn't get into an awkward situation where I had like used it wrong and had someone.
I'm glad.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories about like teachers doing that in front of students because they like just took it at face value and didn't know it was a term. I didn't have anything like that, but I did learn. This happens to me a lot where I like learn about an internet thing and I'm like, I wish the internet weren't the way it was, and then I get sad.
Yes.
Yes, I also feel like I have to write aesthetic with a space between all the letters like that. Aesthetic.
Yeah, it's very, very. I was gonna say wave race. What am I? It's not.
This is a really good summer
Vaporwave.
album. I was like sitting on my porch last night, drinking a guava LaCroix.
Oh yeah.
Like had a candle going because it was nighttime, and just like had this album, and I got so much work done. It was beautiful. I recommend it. Again, there is a Zelda and Chill 2 as well, and just seeing like what tracks are in it. So if I scroll through Fairy Fountain, Dark World, Lost Woods, Song of Storms, Minuet of Forest, Gerudo Valley, awesome. Oath to Order, Dragon Roost Island, Kakariko Village, Ballad of the Goddesses, Breath of the Wild. Yeah. I love
big hits.
The Hateno Village is great, so good. Kind of the main theme, Ocarina of Time, and then the second one has stuff like Cass's accordion thing.
Yeah, that one's
good. There's more like Breath of the Wild stuff I noticed in that second one. So pretty good stuff.
They are. It's
and yeah, it tells you the tracks selected for these two albums tell you something about like what these folks think of as being canon for the series.
And like I would say also like doesn't necessarily like certain tracks I wouldn't necessarily think lend themselves to a lo-fi mix like Gerudo Valley, but they still chose them. Maybe like they're very popular. Mm-hmm. Same with Dragon Roost Island. I don't think of as a kind of lending itself, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, some of the best remix cover arrangement of anything is when something gets pulled and turned into something that is like so far from what the original, when it's like, wow, this is like nothing like the original,
but still sounds cool. Yeah,
but it works. Like, I mean,
whoa.
Even just like Disco Cactus just put out that gorgeous album.
Yeah,
and like some of my favorite tracks on there show like this gap, where like Last Surprise I think is really faithful to Persona 5, to the original, and they do a brilliant version of that. But then one of my absolute favorites on the whole album is called You're Lost, and it's the Link's Awakening like cave theme and some other stuff from that game, including the bees, the little track that plays when there's bees chasing you.
That's just amazing.
And they turn it into this like really awesome jazz remix, and it's one of my favorite things. It's really good. So that's also a Zelda remix in a way. Zelda arrangement, Zelda cover, Zelda jazzy. Wait, what was the jazz one according to Stefan? Arrangement. Zelda arrangement according to Stefan's taxonomy here. So lastly, because the one was on OC Remix, I wanted to just kind of like play a couple others just to show, again, this is I just pulled from Dark World since that was the one mentioned in the 25th anniversary. I just looked up like what does OC Remix have on that track specifically, to sort of see the variety of different things. So hopefully, I just did this like 2 minutes before stream. I put these in, so. So this first one is Come to the Dark Side. It's a funky place. And our arranger is M.I. Evil. And this is from 2000.
Oh, yes.
It's very Mitsuda based to me.
Yep. Bass.
It's so Mitsuda bass. And look at jazzy organ. These are new to Julianne, by the way. I didn't tell her what I picked.
I have not heard these yet, ever. Peter.
I'm here for this. I'm here for this organ.
I will listen to this on hold.
Why can't hold music be this? Okay, so that's a little bit of that one. Obviously, I don't want to play whole tracks because, I'd like to not have everything get struck off my YouTube or my Twitch here.
Yeah.
So a little bit of talking over them, not playing, huge. This is all just for purposes of analysis here. Next one is called Dark Storm. And this is by DJ Pretzel from 2014. And I liked this one because of the rain effect. good. Overclocked remix tracks are all Twitch safe. That's good to know. I thought so, but I wasn't
Oh my god, I love this TV show that we're watching live.
DJ Pretzel is the site's founder. Now we get like Steve Vai guitar, right? This is Zelda by the Doors. So that's kind of more in line with like the Zelda and chill for me. It's like it's got the rain effect, which, you know, plenty of us have that kind of stuff just like to fall asleep to. There's whole apps dedicated to having that kind of like ambiance of different areas, and combining that with this like just real chill guitar. Again, it kind of gives me like Steve Vai vibes. Steve vibes. Maybe not quite as virtuosic as Steve Vai might make it. To its credit, though, like sometimes I'm like, okay. There's some tracks where I'm just like, okay, dude, like we get it. But yeah, this one's really chill. I like it. Then next, just to kind of show, these were just my 4 favorites doing a cursory listen. So maybe this says something about like which styles resonate with me more than others. This next one is called Dark World Ballad, and this one is by Cliff Hooper and Effenjerk from 2009. Now we have an acoustic guitar. Very slow tempo. I love that like moody piano line. I mean, the guitar also has mood, but that like real moody, you know, with the extreme register difference in the very low and the very high in the piano. It just gives it such like a nice vibe. Again, all good vibes here, but it's all the same track.
Differently good vibes. Yeah,
so it's like we have the jazzy version, and then, you know, we've got these two that are more on the chill side, and then I'm trying to remember what the Darkness and the Light is the last one that I pulled just in kind of a quick jump through a bunch of them. And this actually has a couple, this mixes in the ending staff roll and the overworld. It's not just the dark world. And this is by MK Vaff from 2004. And I liked this instantly because of that timbre.
It's like Scala? Are you here?
Right? I guess Matsuda bass in the one, yeah. I must just really want Zelda to be Chrono Trigger. Chill playlist that's all just Dark World. A lot of these take it in that kind of like gentle vibe.
This is very Zelda. Ooh, got a beat. Got it.
Little stop. This one was probably my favorite that I found, so I'm just like letting this one play. I like how the arrangement grows, you know? It doesn't just stay in one spot. Like, you could easily have a whole arrangement that was just that opening feel and it would have worked, but like it keeps kind of evolving, getting bigger, adding different elements, and then it does go into some other parts of Zelda as well, so it is a medley. So anyway, that was just me going, oh, what else is on OC Remix here? What have people done? But yeah, I'm such a huge Chrono Trigger nerd, so there's elements here that
for real.
Clearly. Ooh, hello. We're just gonna play them all and move on. I don't know what it is about PowerPoint. When you're like, go to the next slide, it's like, well, let me play everything first.
I
just
know,
to
it always has to play all the videos. Thanks.
Like, but
here's all of them together.
But do you want to hear them all together?
That's a mashup, I've decided.
We'll just mash up all the Dark Worlds. The multiverse.
Multiverse.
Everything, everywhere, all at once, Zelda.
Oh my god. We're off the rails now.
Yep. So in conclusion, you're like, I barely scratched the surface here. Their like fan creations are innumerable.
Indeed.
And just like how many folks haven't done fan studies, reception theory, and how, you know, this isn't about just like, hey, this is cool, and describing what's happening like we just did.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically, my essay was like, yo, this is cool, so somebody else should write about it. Thanks, bye. That was my essay.
We've talked about this. We give each other work so that we don't
like
have to do it because we have other things we need to do first. Or maybe it's like on the docket, like, oh, I'll get there when I have a second
like,
to breathe.
A better person who's probably read more or written more. Like,
yeah.
you feel like, this is their project.
Yeah, there are things where you're like, oh, I feel like I don't have maybe the background in certain things, but I want to see work on this, and as soon as it's out, I would cite it, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, just understanding reception and what fans have collectively canonized. So even in the couple years since this came out, do you feel like there has been at least more thought about reception? Like, is that something that's changing yet, or?
Yes. I feel like, I mean, we've yelled at Stefan like on every one of these.
Yes, it's true. We're very excited for your
streams because that work is so relevant, and it's also so work that I was like, please finish this dissertation in this essay. And there's like plenty of stuff I haven't read that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it talks about music, but talks about not video game music. It talks about reception and culture and fan culture of other sorts of music, but other sorts of non-musical fan cultures too. And like, my thing was like, hey, I feel like we like to talk about narrativity, particularly in video games. And this is not, I'm not yelling at Andrew.
Andrew!
I'm always yelling at Andrew. Narrative versus ludic. No, but we'd like to talk about narrativity a lot, and like to talk about music and narrativity and film and narrativity and all kinds of things. But this idea was like, okay, also beyond the creators, the fans are kind of creating their own stories around this. And so what are the kind of swirling para-narratives, I guess?
I like para-narrative. It's a good word.
Around,
it's very Janet Murray too, because as we recall, the ludology versus narratology debate, the issue a lot of people had was a section in her book where she's talking about Tetris. And she sort of hints that like, yeah, there's not an embedded narrative in the same way the narrative is like enacted through the process of play. And she's like, it doesn't have to be like you're coming up with character names, you're doing all that. It's just like it's a narrativizing process of putting order to your experience.
Yes. Like a base cognitive sense of narrative instead of just story.
Right. And that there were folks that were pushing back on that, and I don't think wrongfully. Like, let me say that I lean, I guess, a little more narrativist. My husband's more of a ludologist, and it keeps it spicy. But
you gotta have it.
Like, I recognize that like you do need both, and like that's why that was a foundational debate in the field. Was like, you can't only look at code and boundaries of gameplay experience and interactivity, because you are missing that games are also telling stories just like any medium, and like there are these connections. So I think there's a space to both sort of highlight what's special about whatever you're looking at and what's unique from other forms, and put that into conversation. I like when we do both. I like when we do both. And I think it's really important that I get the ludology perspective when I'm working on anything. Like Joe has interesting takes on games, and they make me think about them in different ways. So it's important. So yeah. I like
more
Ryan's
on narrative time when I talk about Final Fantasy IV later.
Yeah, we'll get there. So yeah, we're gonna have you back on for that. I would have gone to that one first just because I love the game. Played it on stream with you. Maybe I'll dig through our Twitch stream and see if there's any particularly fun clippable moments I could play from when we did it. Anyway, you also kind of, as a little end note here, you kind of drop this and they're like, bye. But you're like, oh, by the way, Symphony of the Goddesses toured mostly in the US. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, what about that? Like, what sorts of things are being done because of the audience we're putting this in front of? But also, like, and that's not to say there's anything wrong with it, just kind of like this would be an interesting thing to pursue. And then also that the series itself, as much as it's trying to sort of like classify game music and like appeal to the classical canon and work into those spaces, you also point out that it has this sort of resistant element, and that the series is using almost exclusively women conductors, which in general is less common in a standard professional orchestral setting. So like that's a really cool space that's being created, and opportunities for those conductors. So yeah, it's almost like nothing has to be like one way, and nothing has to be simple. Like I often joke with my students that if you ask an academic a simple question, they will always say it's complicated and just not answer you. And I'm like, I promise most of us aren't doing that to be jerks. We're just recognizing that like multiple things can be true at once. Like, because we're talking about like a lot of things that enter into subjective experiences. So like, there are musically like objective things where you can talk about the frequencies of the waveforms, but ultimately that's not as interesting as looking at all of the places it goes beyond being a waveform that hits our ears, right? So conclusions. Canons, in whatever formulation we examine, are essentially relational and dynamic. They're instantiated, persisted, and resisted by people. People!
This was all just a Soylent Green essay, and I'm sorry.
Canons are people. Canons are people too. Have you ever, like, sidebar, have you ever had Soylent, like the meal replacement?
Yeah, but I know I have not tried that.
It's not made out of people, as far as I know. Created by some tech person to basically not have to spend any time thinking about food. Which, that's a very specific relationship to work, right? Like, I don't want to waste time. I like cooking. I like taking the time to like sit down and not be doing other things sometimes. But Soylent is interesting. It comes in a bunch of different flavors. Joe got some at one point because he was just curious about it. It kind of reminds me of like a protein shake. Because he got the powdered version that you kind of mix up, and they have like a chocolate one. It's fine, but like I think it would be miserable to just live off of. I can see having it as like a quick like, oh, let's grab this in the morning, running out the door kind of thing. But yeah. Anyway, Soylent Green. Canons are people too. And of course I put Best Fairy as our conclusion. sprite
Yes.
here. Literal sprite as a sprite here.
Yeah, Sprite.
Sprite. It's our Dark World fairy, and she's clearly the best of all the fairies. And I found a way. I was like, I have to work her in somewhere.
Yes.
And I decided she gets to sum up everything.
I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. So that was our tour through Canons as Music and Muse.
Thank you.
Beautiful little piece. All 4 of the canon colloquy articles work together in cool ways.
Yes, I hope they do.
Yeah,
I know that
I think they speak to each other beautifully. I know Ryan he assigns the whole thing in class. A lot of people assign it as all 4 of them.
Yeah, all 4.
And actually, I think that might be my last discussion in my video game class this summer is all 4 of these, and sort of just like getting them to think about this sort of categorization that goes on outside of just looking at the game music in the game itself, because all of them kind of do that in interesting ways.
Yeah. These like meta conversations.
We're having meta conversations all over the place. Chat is a good spot for all of that.
Yes.
Yeah, the students' eyeballs get big when I say 4 articles, 1 class, let's go. But because they're bite-sized, they're like 4 to 7 pages. So, assigning all 4 is like assigning 1 larger piece. So it actually works out well, but clearly we had plenty we were able to look at today. And it was lovely. So
yay! I had a good time.
Thank you for being here.
Chilled.
I'm really glad that you got to Zelda and chill with me.
Yes, I'm so glad you had me. I love this stream so much.
It's nice. I'm learning.
Me too. I think we all are.
It's amazing. This is where we throw props to Ryan, because Ryan makes this stuff seem so easy, and then you go to like actually stream and you're just like, there's so many things I have to keep track
so many
of.
Pieces.
There's so many moving parts, especially when you think of like many streamers, it's just them, maybe a green screen, maybe not, but they just put themselves in the corner and then they have the gameplay, and that's what most streamers are doing most of the time. And so the idea of what we do being inherently like, okay, now I'm going to add another NDI feed. I'm going to add a guest or 2 guests or 4 guests, as Ryan has done, and being able to sort of manipulate that. It's a lot to keep track of. And then, having like, oh, the sound balance is, it's like, oh my goodness, why does anybody do this? But it's really neat that we've got a fun space to sign off. Of course, I'm going to tell us about next week's stream. Next Friday, we will be having on William Ayres for one of my favorite NACFGM papers that I was so excited to turn into a JSMIG article, the What Is It Like to Be a Dolphin on Echolocation.
That was such a fun conference paper. Yeah, I'm so glad he turned that into. It
was just one of those papers that, jaw on the floor the whole time.
So good.
Just beautiful deployment of really heavy like theory of consciousness.
Yeah, like for real. Yeah.
Empathy. There's disability studies in there. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, I reached out to Will. I was like, please be on my stream. I love this paper. And luckily Will is gracious enough to be joining me. If anybody is interested, we have a Discord. I will drop a link to the Discord and people could join the Discord, because the Discord has a channel on it called Schedule, where you can also find the
schedule.
As I'm like trying to find a thing.
I know. Just helping you out.
It'll tell you the next the streams through July. So we have June and July booked out. I'm close to having August booked, and then obviously as soon as I book those, I will have those up. But the schedule right now, we have Julianne, and then Will's next week. The week after, we will be having on Elizabeth Medina Gray, and that's another partner, the monthly partnership with the AMS Ludomusicology Study Group, where we're going to be looking at interacting with soundscapes, music, sound effects, and dialogue in video games from the Cambridge Companion. So exciting, because that's beep speechy stuff. So
All good stuff. Oh my goodness.
I think that's the first one we're doing from the giant Cambridge Companion. We're going to be looking at several from that.
Yeah.
And then further out, I have some really fun people who are starting to say yes. So, look forward to that schedule. But yes, next week we will have Will on. I am so looking forward to it. It is such a fun thing. I'm currently trying to get some of the games to play on my computer, so we might be able to do some real-time play. And Andrew actually gets to join us, but not until September, because Andrew is another one that got scheduled with the AMS group, and since they're once a month, I was beholden to their schedule for those specific pieces. So Julianne will also be joining us. I don't remember when. August,
something in August.
Last week of August we'll finally do Final Fantasy. So yes, we will have a couple of repeat guests. I'm basically, and for my own work, I used the Tetris one for the first one as like a proof of concept. Any of mine will be like, I can't get anybody else to fill space kind of streams. Or maybe I could have somebody on to like grill me about my own work, so it's not just me, but it's more interesting when we can have more than one person and actually have a conversation.
Yeah.
But y'all are great, and thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Julianne, for I know we went quite over.
I don't even know.
I mean, I always tell people, like, I plan for an hour, but realistically, realistically, I've blocked out 2 for for most folks, because it allows, as long as you all do. If you have to be somewhere, then we make sure to cut it on time. But when we have the ability to just like let it be a nice evolving conversation and hang out, it adds to the cozy vibe. So, and that's what we want. It's a short article, can't go for very long, but we had to listen to some music. So enjoy your Friday, everybody. Maybe put on some Zelda and chill, and like sip some lemonade under a tree. That seems very Zelda, to be under a tree.
True.
Yeah, just make sure it doesn't spit a bomb out at you, because some of those do that in this game.
True.
So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.